Welcome back, everyone. We're taking another deep dive today, this time into a really um, fascinating period in Indian history.
Okay.
It's the rise of those regional empires,
Yeah.
between the 14th and 17th century.
Okay, yeah.
So we're talking Vijayanagara, we're talking the Bahmani
All
Sultan.
right. Two of the big ones that came after the decline of the Delhi Sultanate, right?
Exactly. It's like, okay, so that big power is gone. Who's going to step in?
Yeah, and it's a kind of a pattern you see throughout history, like when the Roman Empire falls and you have all these different kingdoms kind of pop up to fill that void.
Yeah, it's like watching a power vacuum in slow motion.
Right.
So Vijayanagara down south, they were known for being incredibly wealthy. I mean, their capital city, it was one of the biggest urban centers in the entire world back
It
then.
was massive, a real cosmopolitan hub.
So what was driving that economic engine? What made them so successful?
Well, imagine a city just bustling with merchants.
Okay, yeah.
And not just local traders, but people from as far away as Southeast Asia, all drawn to Vijayanagara's trade networks.
So they were well connected.
Oh, incredibly. And their agricultural system, really sophisticated, it ensured they always had a surplus of goods to trade. Plus, they controlled a lot of valuable resources, especially gold mines. Actually, there's this fascinating historical account
Oh.
called The Periplus of the Erythraean Sea. It's a Greek travelogue from centuries before Vijayanagara's peak. And even back then, it mentions Roman gold coins flowing into southern India.
Wow, so they were plugged into global trade networks for centuries.
Exactly. They weren't starting from scratch. They were building on an established foundation.
So it's more than just finding gold.
Right.
It was about location, strategy, and knowing how to play the trade game.
They were masters of it.
What do you think was the most important ingredient in their success? Was it the agriculture, the trade, or the gold?
It's really hard to pick just one. They had a winning combination, that's for sure. Fertile land, high demand products, and the resources to fuel trade. But I think what truly set them apart was their ability to innovate.
In what way?
Well, take their irrigation systems, for example. They were incredibly complex, able to transform arid land into fertile fields. That maximized their agricultural output and, gave them a significant edge.
Okay, I'm getting a picture of a really sophisticated, forward-thinking society. Now let's talk about the Bahmani Sultanate up in the Deccan region. What always fascinates me about them is this fusion of cultures. Persian, Arab, Indian, all blended together.
It's a real melting pot.
Yeah, like they took the best of each and created something totally new and unique. How did this play out in their society? What are some examples?
Their architecture is a great place to start. Take the Jami Masjid in Gulbarga,
Right.
their first capital. This mosque beautifully blends Islamic and Indian architectural styles. It's a real testament to their unique aesthetic.
A visual representation of that cultural fusion.
Precisely. But it wasn't just about aesthetics. The Bahmanis were serious patrons of literature and scholarship. They attracted intellectuals from all over the Islamic world.
So their courts were like these hubs of intellectual exchange.
Oh, absolutely. Think of them as melting pots of ideas, fostering all sorts of artistic and intellectual growth.
It sounds like they were deliberately cultivating this multicultural environment.
Oh, for sure.
Were they driven by a genuine appreciation for these diverse perspectives, or was there a more, let's say, strategic element at play?
Well, a ruler who embraces different traditions, it can make for a more stable and prosperous realm,
Right, makes sense.
but there's definitely a strategic side to it as well. By patronizing these intellectuals from all these different backgrounds, the Bahmanis made themselves a center for learning and culture.
So it attracted talent, and that talent helped them grow.
Exactly. A brilliant combination of cultural appreciation and political savvy.
I like that. Cultural appreciation meets political savvy. Now, thinking about Vijayanagara and the Bahmani Sultanate together, they were both pretty powerful with their own ambitions. I can't imagine they always got along.
Yeah, you're right about that. It was a very complex relationship. There were times of intense rivalry, battles over land, resources.
Right.
But then, and this is what's so fascinating, there are also times when they cooperated, even formed alliances despite their religious differences. We see Hindu kings turning to the Bahmani Sultanate for support and vice versa.
Wow, so politics could sometimes trump those deeper divisions.
It seems so. Pragmatism often won the day.
So it wasn't a simple good guy, bad guy situation.
Not at all. More like a game of chess with constantly shifting alliances.
Okay, I like that analogy. So what was the main source of tension between them? Land, resources, or something else entirely?
Land and resources were definitely up there. Both empires were expansionists.
Right. Always wanting more.
Exactly. More territory, more fertile land, more control over trade routes. But we can't ignore the religious differences either.
Right, that Hindu empire versus Muslim sultanate dynamic.
Exactly. That underlying tension probably contributed to the sometimes volatile relationship.
It makes you wonder, though, if their rivalry, if it stifled any chance of cultural exchange. Or did ideas and practices still manage to cross those often warring borders?
That's a really good question. And while the conflict definitely dominates the historical narrative, there is evidence of cultural exchange.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like Persianate culture, for example. It was quite prevalent in both courts.
Right.
So that common language, those shared artistic and administrative practices, they probably helped facilitate some exchange of ideas.
So even amidst all the conflict, some cultural pollination was happening.
It seems so. The power of ideas transcending those political barriers.
Fascinating. It makes me want to dive even deeper into these instances of exchange and how they shaped both empires. But I think we need to take a quick break first. We'll be back soon to explore the cultural legacies of these powerful empires and see how their influence continues to resonate in India today.
Sounds good.
So we were talking about that cultural exchange between Vijayanagara and the Bahmani Sultanate before the break.
Yeah, definitely.
It seems like despite all that rivalry, there was still this flow of ideas.
Oh, absolutely. Like we said, Persianate culture, especially the language and how they ran things, acted as a bridge between them.
Right, but it wasn't just limited to, like, the elites. Right.
No, not at all.
Those trade routes must have been major pathways for all sorts of exchanges, goods, ideas, maybe even religious practices.
Exactly.
I mean, think about the merchants and travelers, going back and forth.
Right.
They were like the cultural ambassadors of their time.
In a way, yeah. Spreading all these different influences.
So what evidence do we have of that, like, at the grassroots level?
Well, it's tricky. Those historical sources, they tend to focus on the big stuff.
Yeah, the rulers, the battles, all that.
Right. But if you look at, say, the archaeology, things like pottery styles, textile designs, even how language evolved, you can see hints of that cultural blend.
So it's like piecing together a puzzle, looking for those subtle traces.
Exactly. Like certain architectural motifs popping up in different regions, or specific farming techniques spreading. It suggests that knowledge and practices were definitely crossing those borders.
Okay, so we're starting to get a more, I guess, nuanced picture of this period.
Yeah.
It wasn't just all conflict all the time, but no empire lasts forever, right?
Right.
So what were some of the challenges these empires faced? What ultimately led to their decline?
Well, both of them had their fair share of internal struggles. Succession disputes, when a strong ruler dies, everyone starts fighting for power.
Yeah, classic power struggles. Weakens the whole system from the inside.
Exactly. And when that happens, you become vulnerable to outside threats.
So it's like the empire starts crumbling from within, making it easier for someone else to swoop in.
Yeah, pretty much. And in this case, the big threat came from the north. The rise of the Mughal Empire.
Right.
They had this incredible military power, very centralized administration.
Formidable opponents.
Definitely. And while both Vijayanagara and the Bahmani Sultanate, they had their moments of strength, they just couldn't withstand the Mughal onslaught in the end. The Bahmani Sultanate, it actually fragmented into smaller states.
Okay.
And Vijayanagara, they suffered this major defeat at the Battle of Talakota in 1565 that pretty much marked the beginning of their end.
So in a way, they fell victim to the same forces that helped them rise, that constant struggle for power.
It's a recurring theme throughout history, isn't it?
Definitely. But even though these empires declined, their legacies lived on, right? What are some of the things they left behind that continued to influence India even after they were gone?
Well, their contributions to art and architecture, those are probably the most obvious. I mean, those grand temples of Vijayanagara with the intricate carvings and those towering gateways, they continued to inspire people and shape architectural styles in the south.
Right.
And similarly, up in the Deccan, the Bahmani Sultanate's mosques, tombs, palaces, that unique blend of Islamic and Indian aesthetics, it left a huge mark on the region. And these buildings, they weren't just about showcasing skill and beauty, they were also about power, faith, cultural identity. Those things transcended the empires themselves.
They were statements, for sure. But what about their less visible legacies? Did they influence political thought or administrative practices or social structures in any lasting way?
Absolutely. Both Vijayanagara and the Bahmani Sultanate, they experimented with different ways of governing, collecting taxes, organizing their military. And all those experiments, their successes and failures, they provided valuable lessons for later Indian rulers.
Interesting. So what were some of those lessons? Can you give me an example?
Sure, like Vijayanagara, they had this system of nayakas, basically regional governors.
Okay.
And that became kind of a model for delegating power and keeping control over huge territories.
Makes sense.
And that system, with its emphasis on local administration and sharing revenue, it was adopted and refined by later empires, even the Mughals.
So even in their decline, they were contributing to how India was governed. It's fascinating to see how these empires, despite their eventual fall, shaped the political and administrative landscape. Their legacy went far beyond those impressive monuments. Now, I'm curious about their impact on the social fabric of India. Did they leave behind any cultural or religious practices that we can still see today? We've been talking about those big legacies, the political stuff, the architecture, but I'm really curious about that social and cultural side of things too. Like, did they leave a lasting impact on religious practices, social structures, that sort of thing?
Oh, absolutely. Their impact on India's social fabric is, it's pretty multifaceted. While those grand temples and mosques show their power and their faith, we got to remember both empires had diverse populations.
Right, it wasn't all homogenous.
Not at all. Like Vijayanagara, for example, had a pretty big Muslim population, especially in those port cities.
Right, those bustling trading hubs.
Exactly. And the Bahmani Sultanate, well, they had lots of Hindus, many of them in influential positions. So you have this mix of faiths, cultures. It's bound to lead to interactions, shape those social norms, even religious practices.
So it's more fluid than we might think. Did that mixing lead to any unique traditions, like a blend of Hinduism and Islam?
We definitely see that blending in the art and literature. For instance, Vijayanagara saw this really cool style of temple architecture. It took elements from older South Indian styles, but also had some Islamic art influences.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And in the Deccan, under the Bahmanis, you have the Deccanese style of painting. It mixed Persian techniques with those indigenous Indian themes. Really beautiful stuff.
So even their religious expressions, we see that cross-pollination of ideas.
It's there, yeah.
What about everyday life for ordinary people, though? How did living under these empires affect their customs and traditions?
It's tough to pinpoint specific customs that came directly from their rule, but both empires were known for their administration and social welfare initiatives. Like Vijayanagara was famous for those public works projects. Tanks, canals, temples, those provided jobs and helped people.
Right, investing in their citizens.
Exactly. And the Bahmani rulers, they did similar things. Roads, bridges, all that helped trade and just improve daily life.
So it wasn't all about projecting power.
No, they also understood the importance of taking care of their people, creating a stable and prosperous society.
Makes a lot of sense. What about scholarship and intellectual life? Did they contribute to any advancements in science, literature, or philosophy?
Oh, both empires had really vibrant intellectual cultures. Scholars, poets, they all flocked to those areas. Vijayanagara especially, it was a big center for Sanskrit literature and philosophy. And Krishnadevaraya's reign, he was one of their most famous kings. It's considered a golden age for Telugu literature.
Wow, so they had a significant impact on the literary scene.
Definitely. And the Bahmani Sultanate, with all those Persian influences, saw a lot of growth in Persian and Arabic scholarship. Plus, they made advancements in math and astronomy.
So they were fostering this environment of learning and discovery. It's really impressive. When you think about these empires, what do you think is their most important lasting legacy?
For me, it's their ability to shape those regional identities. Both Vijayanagara and the Bahmani Sultanate, through their culture, their governance, their interactions with all those different communities, they created a sense of belonging, a regional pride that outlasted their empires.
So even though they declined, their influence continued.
Right. The South, with that Vijayanagara heritage, and the Deccan, with that Bahmani influence, they developed these unique cultural landscapes, and you can still see it today in the language, the food, the music, even the social customs.
So those empires had a really profound and lasting impact on the cultural map of India.
Absolutely. They remind us that history isn't just about dates and battles. It's about culture, ambition, the human spirit. And when we explore their stories, we understand the past better and how it connects to the present.
Well said. I think we've done a pretty good job with this deep dive into Vijayanagara and the Bahmani Sultanate. We've seen their achievements, their struggles, and how they shaped medieval India. Those legacies, whether it's in those amazing structures, the literature, or the memories of a region, they show us that even when empires fall, they leave echoes behind, echoes that travel across generations.
And those echoes teach us about resilience, about adapting, about human creativity. Even when things change, we find ways to create, to build, to leave our mark.
It's been a great journey through time, and I hope it sparks some curiosity out there. Keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep diving deep into history. Until next time.